Part 1. The Secret of the White Void. The story begins in the year 1938 on the eve of a global conflict. A team of elite explorers, led by Captain Richard Byrd, stumbled upon something that should not exist in our world. Deep within the frozen wastes of the high Antarctic plateau, they discovered a massive opening in the ancient mountain range. The air around the cavern was strangely warm and carried the scent of blooming flowers. This was the first clue that the continent of ice hid a verdant green heart. As they descended into the darkness, they found walls carved with symbols that predated humanity. These were not the works of primitive men but of a race that understood light. The stones glowed with a pale blue energy that never seemed to fade or flicker. It was a city built of obsidian and clear crystal, stretching for miles beneath ice. The architecture was unlike anything seen in Egypt or Sumeria. Tall spires reached toward the ceiling of the subterranean world. Giant bridges connected the towers over rivers of flowing mercury. There were gardens of metallic plants that moved without wind. The silence was heavy and filled with a low hum, a sound that felt like the heartbeat of the earth. Byrd recorded in his journal that they had found heaven, or perhaps a very beautiful version of a golden hell. They saw machines that floated above the ground without engines, spheres of gold that projected images of the stars above. The stars were not arranged as they are seen today. They showed the night sky as it appeared millions of years before the first man. This was a library of a forgotten solar system legacy. As they moved deeper, they found the Hall of Sovereigns, 12 giant statues of kings, made of a strange white metal that resisted all heat. Their eyes were made of jewels that seemed to follow every movement of the explorers. In the center of the room sat a massive map. It showed the world with no oceans and no ice. It showed continents that have long since sunk beneath waves. One continent was located in the middle of the Atlantic. Another was in the Pacific, between Hawaii and the coast. The map was made of moving light that responded to the touch of a hand. When Byrd touched the center, the entire city began to wake up from its slumber. The lights grew brighter and the hum became a song of 1,000 lost voices calling from time. The explorers felt a sense of dread washing over them. They realized they were intruders in a place that was never meant for mortal eyes. They saw shadows moving in the corners of the spires, shadows that were too tall and moved with too much grace to be human beings. Byrd ordered his men to retreat back toward the surface, but the tunnels had changed, as if the city was shifting its shape like a living organism of cold stone. They were lost in a labyrinth of light and shadow. The temperature began to drop rapidly as the city breathed. Every breath was a blast of frost that killed light. They found a room filled with golden suits of armor made for giants with 3 arms and large heads. This was the graveyard of the masters of the world. The air grew thin and cold as they entered the chamber of eternal echoes. Every footstep echoed like a drum against the crystal floor. Captain Byrd noticed that their shadows were no longer attached to their feet on the ground. They danced on the walls, independent of their movements, and whispered in a language of static and broken glass. One of the men screamed when he saw a face forming in the smooth obsidian, a face with elongated features and eyes like black mirrors. It was a reflection of a memory that did not belong to his own mind. The city was feeding on their fear like a hungry beast from the ancient void. They reached a massive gate, sealed with a heavy liquid metal that flowed like water. It was the entrance to the great archive of time. Inside the archive they saw thousands of transparent cylinders filled with a glowing silver gas. Byrd realized these were not bottles but storage devices for the consciousness of the masters. Each cylinder contained the thoughts and the lived experiences of a being from the stars. If one were to touch the glass, they would see the birth of the sun. They would feel the heat of volcanoes that died millions of years before the dinosaurs. The history of the universe was written in the gas, waiting for a mind strong enough to endure the weight. The team geologist tried to open one of the containers, but the gas escaped and turned into a freezing mist. It froze his hand instantly, shattering his fingers like ice. The city did not want its secrets to be stolen. They moved toward the center, of the archive where a monolith of pure light stood. It projected a holographic vision of a great celestial war. They saw ships the size of moons clashing in the darkness between the distant stars. They saw planets breaking apart, like dry clay in the hands of a violent giant. The city was not just a home but a bunker, a refuge for the losers of a cosmic struggle for the soul of the galaxy. The masters had fled to the coldest part of Earth to hide from their hunters. They had built this labyrinth deep beneath the thick ice and went into a sleep that was supposed to last until the hunters were gone. But something had gone wrong with their stasis chambers long ago in the deep past. In the next hall they found the sleeping pods themselves, row upon row of sarcophagi made of gold and lead. Through the glass lids they saw the inhabitants of the city. They were tall and slender with skin like moonlight. Their hands had 6 fingers, and their hair was silver. They looked peaceful as if they were merely dreaming of a world without any pain. But Byrd saw that many of the pods were broken. The bodies inside were withered and turned to gray dust. Only a few pods still hummed with the blue energy. The survivors were waiting for a signal from the heavens, a signal that had never arrived in all these eons. The captain felt a deep sadness for these lonely gods, trapped in their beautiful tomb. Suddenly the floor began to vibrate with a violent force. The blue lights turned red, and the hum became a scream of grinding metal gears. The city had detected a second group of intruders nearby. Through a viewing portal they saw men in gray uniforms, carrying flags with ancient symbols. The Nazi expedition had arrived at the southern entrance of the labyrinth with heavy drills. They were not here to learn but to conquer and take the weapons of gods. Byrd knew that if they reached the archive, the world would be plunged into darkness. He had to find a way to seal the city forever, even if it meant staying behind in the ice. The vibration of the heavy Nazi drills echoed through the halls like the drums of an approaching apocalypse. Captain Byrd and his men hid behind the massive pillars of the Hall of Giants. They watched as the soldiers in gray uniforms entered the sacred chamber with cold eyes. These men did not feel the awe of the ancients. They saw only the power of the silver machines and the potential for global dominion. Their leader was a man with a face of stone. He held a black crystal that pulsed with a dark and hungry light. This was the key of Agartha, a relic stolen from a monastery in the high mountains of Tibet. It was designed to override the security of the sleeping gods and wake the city.